And welcome back to Creative Thinkers. Again, my name is Miguel Valenzuela, and we're here again with a special guest, very, very awesome muralist from local here in El Paso, Paola Martinez. Thank you for coming and visiting with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure being here today with you.
Awesome, awesome. So we want to start the conversation today talking a little bit about what you do. So what is a muralist? Because we were talking earlier, and you were saying that doing graffiti and murals are a very different thing. How is that?
Well, I think graffiti is like its own world, and then there's like the urban art aspect of it. Graffiti is more based on a certain culture and lettering. And then, like, for example, I spray paint, but I'm not a graffiti artist. So there's kind of like a little bit of a difference there.
So what you do specifically is, and I don't want to just call it fine art because there's all kinds of art all over the place, but it is something that it was more of a technical thing that you learned, like spray painting, and then you're mixing it in with the fine art aspect of what you learned in school?
Yeah, most definitely. I think when you become an artist, you kind of start developing and intermixing different things. I think it comes with the whole packet of being a creative, just experimenting and things like that. So most definitely. Yeah,
experimenting is super important, right? When you say experimenting, though, because I know that you were telling me that you actually studied at UTEP and you got a fine arts degree at UTEP. And through that, you learn technical things like how to sculpt, how to paint, how to do all of these things. How did you bring all of that into what you're doing now with the murals?
Oh, I think I think that as an artist, when you learn things that work for you, then you always bring it to the table, independently of what you're doing, like even unconsciously, you know, you have that information embedded, and at one point it can just serve you. But I'm more of a flow, go with the flow person, a very intuitive artist. So it's not like I'm always like measuring and thinking and this and that, but rather just letting the art flow through and just see what happens, you know?
Yeah, you know what's really cool, because when we met, I actually met you painting an actual giant piece of artwork out in the streets, which was really cool. Very nice. You look wonderful, by the way. But when I met you, I was like, wow, what's going on here? Because it was so big and so dramatic. And what really caught my eye was how you created these little marks onto the work of art that were kind of guiding you. And I'm an artist myself, so I paint and do all these things. But when I saw that, I'm like, what's going on here? So I had to talk to you. But what really took me aback is how well-defined all of the elements are within the piece when you kind of step back from it, and how realistic it looks, how real it looks, almost photographic in quality. Is that something that you really focus on in all of your work?
You know, when I start a piece, I don't necessarily have those expectations. I just kind of flow through it, and then towards the end, I do pay attention to certain details that could develop into a more realistic piece. I like to do, but usually with oil on canvas, as a multidisciplinary artist. When I'm working with oil on canvas, it gives me more room or more space to create a little bit of more realism. But for example, with spray paints, it's a completely different, medium, completely different animal, you could say. It's a little bit harder for me, just because I've only had 2 years of experience with it. And
so this is fresh for you, the whole mural thing.
The whole mural, yes.
Wow. So I'm very impressed, because one of the pieces that you did, actually the piece that I saw you doing, was the two Raramuris, or Tarahumara indigenous people, and they're two women. Why did you choose to do two women? Why didn't you do like a male and a female, or two children? What was the
I thought it was important,
the idea there?
As a trans-border piece, bringing in the indigenous cultures that a lot of people from El Paso are not exposed to, and these are indigenous cultures that migrate from the Copper Canyon region, and we have a lot of them in Juarez. We have two communities. And so I kind of wanted, a piece that would be kind of like if a border didn't exist, and like people were coming over, then you definitely would see probably 2 female raramuri, or like one leaning against the wall. Why 2 females? It was I didn't really think about it. I just really wanted to have these 2 women there, and mostly because they're related, to each other from the photo that I.
So I guess I'm taking by what you're saying that these are individuals that you have met at some point and talked to?
No, not personally.
Oh, okay. But one of the things that you talked about when we were having our conversation earlier was that you were saying that when you were younger, you would actually travel into Copper Canyon a lot. Yeah. Did that influence what you were doing here?
Most definitely. I mean, I do different paintings, like the black and white piece that I finger paint, and those are portraits of the raramuri. And it's influenced me a lot. My father would take us down to the Copper Canyon region, and we would basically just picnic there, and we would share with the raramuris what we had, and they would sit, and we would eat like in the grass together. And I had the opportunity to actually like play with other kids from that community. So to me, it was always like something that stuck with me. And the idea of the indigenous cultures suffering a lot of classism in Mexico, and me being super naive and like, oh no, yeah, we're all equal here, and life is great. And then you grow up and you're like, oh, like this is a big issue.
Yeah.
Not only in Mexico, but I think worldwide. The color of your skin marks everything. And that's also why I place the portraits that I finger paint of the raramuri with in black and white, just to eliminate skin color.
Oh, wow.
And eliminate the factor of classism and create equality through that, which I think is very important.
How important for you is this whole idea of the classes and how we need to come together as people? And how does your artwork help that?
My artwork is all about bringing diversity and equality through it. So, for example, I've worked with different pieces or different bodies of work that talk about subcultures, and just how sometimes they're viewed almost, well, I work with a lot of minorities too. Me being a triple minority, being an artist, being a woman, and being Hispanic.
Oh my gosh.
So it was
That's a triple whammy right there. But you know what? We have to knock down those barriers, and we have to make sure that we are able to help with other people's trials and tribulations, right?
Most definitely.
And one of the things that you mentioned about the piece when you were painting at the Raramuris is that you had a woman stop by and say, why in the world are you painting these indigenous people? Like, why don't we have something else? I found it very interesting that you talked to the woman and educated her in a way that she was understanding why you were doing it. So are you always trying to educate people?
If I have the opportunity, yes. I think it's super important. The way that people view things is the value that they have inside of them. So morals and values and all of these things that they carry, especially with education, along how they view the world. So obviously, if you don't have a certain background in certain things, then you won't be able to even identify certain things or just acknowledge things because of pure ignorance. And I think that we're all a little bit ignorant. I declare myself ignorant in many, many other subjects, but I'm always have the thirst and drive to better myself and keep reading and keep learning more about things. I think that's the important part, the wanting to learn and the wanting to know why, and questioning things, just questioning, it's important. Yeah,
like one of the other things that we talked about was the fact that you had actually gone out of town several times, specifically to Europe. And you mentioned that you went so you could become part of these communities. How important is it for people to get out there and travel and see the world?
Oh my God, I think it's the best investment that anyone can do to themselves. To the better for themselves.
So true.
And you learn and you meet so many interesting people, and you learn so many ways of living life. And there's not just one way of doing things. And you learn that there's this entire world of opportunities and you know, cultures and just of doing things. And that kind of like pushes you out of that little box that you've been living in your own culture, in your own community, in your own city, because you know, these are things that you learn with generational aspects, like what your great grandmother taught your generations into what today's you, Miguel. Yeah. So it's just passing along those things. But when you kind of open yourself to even viewing more diverse or diversity in your world, then it completely changes you, I think, for the better. And it opens your mind a lot more. So I think it's extremely, extremely important to travel, to view, to get out there and to meet amazing people. Yeah. And one of the things that I think that one gains when traveling is understanding how creativity works. So our show obviously is called Creative Thinkers. How important is creativity in one's life? Like, is it something that not just because you're an artist, but are you constantly thinking outside the box, or are you kind of straightforward in what you do? You know what? Creativity is like, it's everywhere. I agree with that. It's in the kitchen. It's in the clothes that we wear. You know, creativity is in the way that we dance. Creativity is just surrounding us. And I think it's just a matter of grabbing those things that interest, you know, you as a person. It could be music, you know, and just developing through, it's almost like a personal journey through a specific medium. So I think creativity is extremely, it's a beautiful gift that we were given. Yeah. You know, the ability to create, to think, to say, oh, you know, what if we turn it around kind of thing. Yeah, exactly. And do you think that people need to nurture that creativity within themselves, whether it be in the kitchen or through the clothes, as you say? I think we all are beings in an amazing potential that we have, and we're all extremely creative. But I do think that you need to nurture it. Like maybe it doesn't come as natural as other people, but it's something that, you know, you give yourself time, you dedicate time to be like, oh, you know, do I like this yellow sweater? Okay. Which I love, by the way. But yeah, that's absolutely true. I think that when we are children, we are learning certain things, and sometimes we kind of get into the working environment, we end up growing up, and then we kind of get stuck, and then we're like, I don't know, maybe I just need to work, come home, make dinner, go to sleep, but then we don't nurture that. Yeah. When you were a child, and you say that you went and traveled and did all these things, when you were a child, was there a mentor that you had, somebody that really kind of nurtured this whole idea of creativity within your life? You know what? Yes. I was a pretty weird child. And by weird, what do you mean? Because I was a weird kid too. Like I would be kind of like that little girl wearing like the plastic heels with the feather boas and her sunglasses, you know, plastic heels backwards probably. I love it. And just like walking everywhere like that. And even my older sister would be like, Mom, like tell her to, you know. But my mom would she always let me be. But I had a great uncle. He was a great uncle coming from an entire life of ranching, or you know, you wouldn't think that that's so creative, but how did that work out? He had this thing inside of him, and he left the ranching business that the family always owned. And he went to Mexico City, and he went to find himself there. And there he discovered his passion for, you know, reading and art history and poetry and music, operas, you know, things like that. How cool is that? So I always looked up to him. Well, was that a thing where you saw what he did and you're like, you know, I can admire what he's doing, so I want to mimic that? Or was it something that you kind of... he saw something also in me that was kind of like, oh, you know, this this child's kind of different, you know, it's kind of weird. Like to my mom, like, hey, watch out, you know? But I feel like he was the first person to support me, or to not support me, but to understand me a little bit more in a world where I felt very misunderstood because I wouldn't necessarily, you know, fit in.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I know exactly what you're talking about. And I think it's important because my mom did the same thing for me. She was always pushing, you know, if you like art, do art. If you like architecture, do architecture. If you want to dress a different way, do it. And she would always be very supportive. So I agree that having somebody like that, not pushing you, but supporting what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, very, very important.
And like I had mentioned to you, I was like that weird 3-4-year-old that would, you know, tune in the radio and put some operas on.
You were saying that, yeah.
So my uncle, or my great uncle, was the one that gave me like a first set of, he burnt some CDs back in the day.
Really?
And gave me like, oh, you know what? If you like this, then you'll like this.
Like
this,
symphonic music and whatnot?
Yeah, so
wow.
it was I had him to kind of have like this intercommunication of things that were interesting to us that maybe we couldn't talk to with like anybody else. Because if I sit with my mom and I'm like, hey mom, you know, I found these brushes with this and that, and you know, they're made of this. She's gonna be like, oh yeah, they're just some brushes, you know, like
that's the thing. I think it's really important that we understand that these things are not just things. Everything has its certain level of importance, and we need to elevate the little things because it's the little things that matter. What do you think?
I completely agree. Even in art, you know, it's the little details that actually, it's the little shine that you put on an eye that makes the eye look real.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's the little tiny minuscule things that you wouldn't think they'd make some type of a difference, but it does, and it completely changes. And I think it's the same thing with life.
Yeah.
And we've learned to idealize like the grandiose moments of it, but we also have to learn to enjoy the little tiny things in life.
Yeah, little things, just like the details in your work. So you actually have a piece right here, which is super awesome.
Yes, that's a print.
Yeah, so this is a print of a painting. What's the size of this? What's the scale?
It's about 24 by 24, you know, not super big, but it's an oil on canvas piece. And it's from a series that I'm working on continuously, which is the subculture of the frontera. Because as a melting pot, we develop all of these little, not cliques, but communities. And they're so individual, but they're part of the culture that we have here in the border. And so I wanted to touch upon, you know, the Chicano culture that is so different from, you know, crossing the border to Juarez, because it's just, they're there, the communities are there, but they're just a different mentality, a different mindset, you know?
Absolutely.
So,
and we really don't understand how big of a barrier there is between our cities. One of the things that we were talking about is how difficult it is to even see the real culture. If you're not constantly traveling into Mexico, you're not really going to be in the thick of things. One example that I gave was the raramuris, right? Literally, if I walk over the bridge downtown El Paso into downtown Juarez, I will probably run into a tarahumara/raramuri woman or child. But, you know, I cross back over 150 yards into the United States and I don't have that. And one of the biggest misconceptions that we have here in our community is when people travel through our city, of course it's called El Paso, so most of the people just pass through. But if they end up staying, there really isn't anything that people can get to know who we are as a community. But so I want to thank you for creating works of art in our community, because it's important for you to send those messages out. One of the other things that you do is you're very meticulous about your work in the Raramuri women portraits. How did you start doing that? Because you actually use your fingerprints and fingertips and all that. What's going on there? Is it like more of a tactile kind of connection? It is a tactile connection.
It was kind of also a way to try and connect more with the person that I was painting. But also, you know, coming into play, you know, sculpting like a three-dimensional piece with a two-dimensional piece, but not necessarily, and just eliminating the brush factor completely.
Oh, wow.
So I think painting those things is very meditative, because you're just not really, like, you're using two colors, just black and white, and you're not, comes to a point where you're not really thinking about it. You're just, it's happening, you know?
And you know what? It's also very personal, because if you're putting that level of attention onto the piece by, you know, putting the fingerprint onto it, it becomes so much more part of you. Because when you're painting with a paintbrush, I feel like you have this extension, so you're much more connected. How connected are you to your pieces? For me, they're like babies. What are they for you? Because it's very interesting.
It is, you know, they are very special to me. You have this connection with them because they're part of you in a way, and they're part of something that's inside of you that was just transitioned into something physical. But I think that it's very important to let go of your babies, you know, kind of thing. Because then what's the purpose of creating them if
So
not
true.
for other people to view, to enjoy, to feel, to see?
So true.
So.
One of the things that we also talked about was how you grew up. You grew up partially here in the United States and partially in Mexico. How does that translate into your work?
You know, it's something very strange to have done that, because then you get to see the both sides of the coin, and you can get, you know, you have an experience where you realize how different things are, but you also have the way of understanding both sides of the border. So you're kind of like in the middle aspect, viewing outside, and then you're like, okay, yeah, I totally get the people from Juarez, because I'm, you know, from Juarez, but I totally get the people from El Paso because I'm from El Paso too. So like 100% fronteriza. I never, growing up, I never saw it as something like important or interesting.
Right.
It was just like, oh yeah, you know, destiny. I was born here, you know?
It's the way that it is. It's the way that I live, right?
Thank you, gods, I guess. I don't know. Is that a good thing? But most definitely has changed my mentality on being able to empathize. And not only here, but now I get to travel all over the world. And I have this flexibility of, you know, molding myself and with the respect of having, you know, different traditions and being able to accept those, because
Absolutely.
you know, it's just a beautiful way of creating a lot of empathy. So it definitely influences my work. It's
influences
part of me.
the work big time,
it's
right?
part of me.
Yeah, it has to be part of us as individuals, as creators, and we always kind of push these ideas through to the viewer. One of the things that I do quite often is I try to explain things to the people that are viewing my work. You know, this is about this is about that. But one of the things that I see with your work is that they're so well defined in a way. Like when you look at the Raramuri, you know, and can assimilate with the connection that the two women have, with the piñatas also, which is a mural that is at the outlet mall, right?
Correct.
That people can assimilate. This is a happy time. With the alebrijes that are also at the outlet malls, you see the same thing. It's like, this is part of my culture. What is in the future for you?
Oh, wow. What an intense question.
What's happening in your world?
I don't even know what I'm going to do tomorrow. And you're here asking me about, you know, like the future. Thank you for giving me anxiety.
Right.
No,
sorry about that. But you said that there is a kind of a movement to create more murals here in this city?
Most definitely.
Yeah.
You know, in the future for me, I don't have expectations. I know that my life will be beautiful regardless of what direction it goes, but I know and I'm certain that I will have the opportunity to grow more so as a person and as an artist as well. So most definitely in the future, I see myself developing my art and just growing more as a person through it.
What do you think about the people that are viewing the art? Do you think it's important that they truly understand the concepts of what it is to have art in their lives? Or can we just leave the people be and let the art affect them any way that it can? You know what?
And that's the beauty about art. You can't put it in a box. And I think a lot of people don't really want to go to like museums or things like that because they're like, oh, I just don't understand it, you know? Like, I don't know anything about art, and you don't need to know about art in order to experience it.
That's exactly right.
And there's this spirituality that art carries within itself that I think that can move people regardless of if they're fully understanding the meaning of the piece or not. But as long as that seed is planted, then it like 80% of the work is done.
Yeah, which is great. What advice can you give our viewers as far as kind of getting more connected to art or bringing this creativity into their life?
The advice that I would give them is find what you love. Find what moves you, what you're interested in, and maybe you're not the best at it. You know, maybe you're burning toast and you want to become a chef someday.
Right.
That's fine.
You got to start somewhere.
But if you truly are passionate and enjoy it, then it doesn't matter if you're cooking in a little changarro or in some fancy restaurant somewhere,
right.
Because it's what it gives you and what you can give back to the people because of that passion that you are transporting out, you know?
How important is that for you as an individual, having that passion for your work?
It's everything. It's everything. Otherwise, you know, and it's difficult too. Like, I'm very passionate, but it's hard. I'm not saying it's easy because sometimes I show up with fear, but I show up regardless, you know. Maybe I'm afraid to start a huge piece and I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? But then I'm like, okay, I can do this, you know? Or other times when things don't come out and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to pull my hair out. Like, it's not an easy path just
One
because,
step at a time.
It's not an easy path just because you're passionate about it. You have to work at it, and good things take work.
Yeah, every single day. Well, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to talk to us today because you've been very insightful and very creative individual. So if somebody wants to get a hold of you, how do they get a hold of you? You have Instagram, do you have Facebook?
Yes, I don't have Facebook. I manage everything through Instagram because I'm not the best at social media, and then it's like task on top of task on top of task. But you guys can find me at Hello Paola, HELLOW PAOLA.
Awesome.
On Instagram.
Beautiful.
Exactly.
Well, again, I wanted to thank you for being our guest.
On the contrary, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a blast talking to you.
It was a pleasure. So thank you very much for joining us again, and hopefully you guys can come again to our next show because you guys are going to learn a lot of stuff about art. Thank you.